Hi, welcome to the next episode of Triggers in Spiritual Medicine. This is all about real talk. Sorry, there we go. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, to the growing sickness in our society, to address root issues and provide sustainable solutions. We hope by addressing the intersectionality and connecting the dots like the web to many of society's challenges, we hope others can understand the trauma infection that impacts all areas of our life: addiction, domestic violence, racism, homelessness, sexual assaults, chronic health issues, cancer, environmental issues, climate change, and more. In this new collaborative program, we hope to share a new perspective of solutions, healing, and resolutions. In each episode, that we address a certain trigger while offering the spiritual medicine with at least 3 tips or actionable steps that you, our listeners, can take and implement. And before I get started, because I always forget, make sure you follow, like, comment, engage, because that is how these episodes get seen, and if you find value in these, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter to support our social justice initiatives. And today I am so excited to have as the guest as Sierra Melcher, who is the founder and publisher of Red Thread Publishing. She is a freaking badass, y'all. Like seriously, just look at this title: Feisty, Dangerously Amazing Women Using Their Voices to Make an Impact. I mean, like, seriously, what the fuck? So, so I took me 10 years to write a book, with all these fears, being a survivor of domestic violence and sexual assault and post-separation abuse to the court, which is what I write in this book, but a lot of the healing journey in that book. November is Family Court Awareness Month. So my story is in both. We're not going to go so much into that. But in learning and working with Sierra, first I was like, I don't know, something just drew me, right? And I just said yes. And then getting to know Sierra and the publishing team and finding that it's all women led, it's international, and to find like almost every single person has been a survivor of some form of abuse. And I'm like, these are some seriously powerful women on a mission. So I could not help it but to bring Sierra on here, who's going to talk about her process of like writing as like her medicine, but she's going to talk about where she comes from, just so you get a kind of a background scope of like where she comes from, so you get to know where that medicine comes in. Welcome, Sierra.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. And I heard you just say it's taken you 10 years to write a book, and there's 2 books behind you, both of which have been born this year. So I just want to congratulate you on that.
Thank you.
That's the fuel that keeps us going. Just seeing you and the stories that you tell and what you do once your story is out there. It is an incredible journey. Really glad to be here.
Well, thank you. So tell us about, like what was the triggering event that said, one, I have this stuff going on and writing is kind of like my medicine, my therapy, my best friend, all those things, right? To like, I want to help 10,000 women publish their own stories,
There's never, for me, just one triggering moment, right? It's the aggregate of this plus this plus this. A lot of moments that were ideas not acted upon. And I live in South America and it's loud here, so we're gonna roll with that. But actually, that's sort of I think if I had to say one thing, is, without even realizing it, that dog barking put it into clarity for me that leaving the United States shifted me out of a cultural soup that I was steeped in, and I didn't recognize the culture until I was out of it. And Colombia is loud. It's passionate. They love to fight and they love to love, and to I'm from New England, and, there's sort of a way that you're supposed to do things, and there's a way you're supposed to be. And being thrown out of that, I lived in China for a while, and then I came to live in South America. And my story was that I was afraid of my voice. I was afraid of saying that I want this and I don't want that for years. And so my silence, whether it was related to trauma or just like, hey, I like you, it was everything. I was trapped in this space that I created. It was the result of something too, but I was an active participant in my silence. And I'd been interested in writing, but I had stories about why I couldn't, dyslexic, what will people think, who am I, all of that stuff. And the process of unpacking and finding that voice, Feisty is a perfect example that it doesn't happen all at once. And the women who wrote in Feisty, that's not the first step. Writing a chapter in that book was no one's first step. But I think to your larger question of writing as a form of spiritual medicine and healing trauma, there's a million steps before. But from my own experience and now from having worked with over 100 women in the writing of stories, not all about trauma, but so many about trauma in one form or another, we get to a point where we're like, I think I'm through this. I think I've done all the work. And then it comes time to write about it. And there's a whole nother layer, a whole nother dimension, or 90 that we sort through to show up in a whole nother level. You and I have had conversations about your process.
Right. It's funny because what really kind of, what brings to mind is listening to you also brings me to mind, which I believe is episode 6, which I will tag it in this episode, is I interviewed a friend of mine who was just healing from breast cancer, and who's also from Vermont. And she wrote this beautiful piece as an article on how the burning times of witches influence white women culture today. And I was really blown away because I was just like, yes, yes, because I was like, why is it here in the States, right? And I don't know if maybe you saw some of this too, where we like do this instead of do this, right? And it seems almost instinctual. And we talk a lot about in that podcast about like 9 million women, 9 million leaders, healers, thought provokers, right? Warriors were murdered. It's the one genocide nobody talks about, right? And and I keep thinking, how did that even impact over 500 years, just our very DNA on how we react and relate to other humans, right? And it's been thought-provoking. So I'm curious with you, like, did you notice similar things too when moving from like the States to Colombia, or just how people relate in general and even telling stories?
Yeah, well, so I have a history background. For 15 years, I was a history teacher. And so I'm always looking to history for explanations of culture, whether it's why in China do they do it this way and why da 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 da. Colombia has its own huge set of violence and trauma, and it's a lot fresher, lived, current, within the last 20 years. Everybody here is processing trauma, but the response is really different. The way that the culture interacts, the way that people interact, there's a very, very strong family focus. And I think in the United States, individuality is really one of the core values. And that's really isolating. And it holds us back. So here there's music and and they're just so loud. And for a long time, I thought that I was coming from this New England puritanical, like Quaker, just, you know, that your silence is appreciated. And here it's your life, because it might be short, because there could be a bomb tomorrow. And for certainly most of the 20th century, in Medellin especially, violence was predominant in this culture. But the response to that trauma was almost like live more. And my own response was hide as much as possible in plain sight and like disappear instead of. So that's just I'm still not comfortable with the, you know,
Yeah.
some people do. And
I mean, I noticed just energetically for those who are kind of sensitive, right? When I traveled to Colombia, and of course, people in the States look at Colombia and they go, "Oh, why do you want to go there?" That's like, and I was just like, when I went there, I was like one click away. How can I move here? Because it didn't matter the level of poverty or affluence, it seemed that it was a mentality that people had, and it was much lighter. There was like a lightness because they were expressing and they weren't harboring, and it wasn't, it's hard to put into words, right? Because of what we see here. And it made me come back here, and it did influence how I wrote and completed Secrets to Healing. Because when I noticed, like the minute I landed off the plane in Boston, there was a heaviness, there was a denseness in the air. And one of the things I talk about is like the Shinto culture in the Japanese culture, is I believe in this concept called kododama. Kododama means words have spiritual power, but it's not just the spiritual power, it's the energy. It's like, you know, I love you. I love you. Like it's the energy behind the words, right? It's like, you know, like I compare it to like gaslighting in the States, because people understand what that means and what that feels like, right? It's there. But there, and I started realizing how much of like the collective here just in Boston, between the Salem witch trials, what we did to the Native Americans in the genocide, and the birthing of where the Revolutionary War was birthed here. There's so much, and how much does that impact our psyche and how we relate to others, you know? And it really impacted how I write, you know? So I'm curious, like what that taking off that veil for you, what that felt like for you, right? That unpacking, that almost decolonizing American mindset, right?
Yeah.
And some might frown upon what us saying that, but sometimes you have to see outside the box to know what's in our hidden blinders, right? Our hidden biases, right? We don't know what we don't know until the veil is off, right?
Well, and it's really hard to take that veil off in the same space, in that same energy, that you can't see the soup. I remember leaving the United States for the first time in my 20s and seeing myself for the first time differently. So it was a long, slow process of finding my voice and sort of separating from what had kept me safe, sort of what kept me safe in that culture, in the US culture, was almost what was suffocating me in another culture.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
That what was my preservation was to not talk about it, was to hide it, to hold it, to carry it, to keep it hidden. And that same approach, that same strategy didn't work, because it took a number of years for me slowly to unpack finding my voice and putting little pieces of myself into the light. But the more that I did it, the better it felt. And now that you even bring it up, I'm not sure that process, I think that process would have been harder in that same culture. But I also exist sort of in between cultures, right? I'm still part American living in a foreign place. And so I get this almost permission slip to be neither. I can be something else. But you bring up words having energetic power, and with my slightly dyslexic brain, I've always been really interested in actual the meanings behind words and clicking. You know, we talk about witches and casting a spell, and the word to spelling. All you have to do is to write it down, and it changes its meaning, or it like makes it magic. And so there are, for me, the process of putting a story into words and putting it on the page, for me, has always been the final part of a healing process. That I can do all the work in my heart and I can do all the work in my head. But until that exists in the physical form on the page, whether it's a published book or just on the page in front of me in a notebook, the process is an excavating process. And this is, for me, where I went from, I just need to do this for myself, to I recognize the need for this on a larger scale. From the historical context, as a history teacher, I was like, there's not enough resources written by women from the perspective of women. And I want future teachers just to have so many more voices to call from.
What do you, and speaking of that, like, what are you witnessing when you're seeing, whether myself or other writers, like they're struggling, their process, the triggers that show up as they're writing before they actually become published?
So this is where all of my past lives and careers and everything come together. Being a teacher, working to empower women, and now in the publishing space, this is where every single woman who comes to tell her story is in this absolutely transformational self-empowerment journey. And empowerment's not something I can do to you or for you. It's something that you do for yourself. And it is in that writing, it is in that stepping forward into your authority, author being the root word of authority, really becoming an author and claiming your voice and your message in another way. It's effing terrifying. Okay, sounds glorious. We could talk about it as being beautiful. It is out and out scary in so many different parts of the process. And this is where
Like a different aspect of shadow work.
Signing a contract, people freak out. Okay, partially because you're putting money down, partially because you're saying you're going to do this thing. But then there's all these different moments, but they're the same moment over and over for each woman. I'm like, I know when you're going to freak out. I can tell you now that you're going to call me 2 weeks before your book comes out. You're going to call me the night before your book comes out, and you're going to ask me not to publish it, right? You're going to say, never mind, just kidding. It's only been a year or 10 years of working on this, but let's just, no, how about no? Not usually that calm. It's usually because there's so much at stake. And I think this is in our DNA, this degree of fear of, if I say what I really believe, whether we will literally be burned at the stake or just social media will burn us to the ground, that fear is in us. And fear, for the longest time, the fear of my voice, my own silence, my silence was that trigger. But I was continuously triggered by my silence to stay silent. It was this tightening bond where the medicine is, yeah, there's fear, but how you respond to that fear. There are some fears that are genuine, and fear is a great tool. It keeps us safe. And then there's times where the fear is unfounded. Not that there's not going to be pushback, not that there's not going to be shit, but that showing up in the face of that fear is the healing itself. And so while, yes, I want for my daughter to have access to all the voices that have been silenced, it's not just about the product, because for each woman who shows up to tell her story, and as you know, you've witnessed this in that collaborative of Feisty, and you've witnessed this within yourself when your book came out last month, all of the continuing, I think you said, I thought I'd done this. I thought I'd finished this part. I thought I'd healed that. I thought I was, and you're re-confronted with the next part of owning your story, uncovering that journey, and putting it out there in another way. Is not only have you created something that will continue. I mean, our logo is this drop and the ripple, right? It'll not only continue to energetically ripple, intellectually ripple, and have an impact, it's doing that for you, right? If one of the fears that women come with, and I come up against it every single time I sit down to show up on an interview or write a something, is what if nobody cares? What if this doesn't help anybody? What if it has no value? And my response to others, it's usually a lot more generous than my response to myself, is, will this help you? Will this change you? Will this transform you? What if writing your book only helps one person? What if that's you? Is that enough? Yes, that's enough. And inevitably, and of course, it's going to impact more people, right? The changes that happen for us when we face those fears, when we continue to excavate the healing process. Women are writing about all sorts of things, even things that we don't think of as triggering, estate planning and clean living, and all the different things that aren't in directly trauma or trigger based,
but still come up.
Oh my gosh.
So it comes up.
I'm writing, I have an opinion, and I'm expressing it, and I'm saying so publicly, and what if nobody likes it? And it's all there. And what happens on the other side is that we start to see ourselves differently. And I've said this before, but we come with this, what if I can't? What if it's not? Sort of doubt, fear based questions. And then we do the thing, and we write the book, and we publish the book, and we keep acting forward in the face of all of those doubts and all of those fears. And then whether it's that day or that month or that year, a woman starts to see herself differently. And she says, quite literally, I've had so many authors come to me with, so I did this impossible thing. It was impossible to write a book. I didn't think I could, and I did. What else can I do? Right? What else can I do that I didn't know that I could do? How else can I use my mind and my voice and my heart and my life? Whether it's starting a foundation or speaking more publicly or listening and supporting an individual on a one-on-one. And it's that that transformation for one that continues to have that ripple, that when we are showing up in the face of that fear, we're different. the fear doesn't win anymore.
What have you, and the 100 women you've helped publish, what have you witnessed post-publishing with these stories, with these women? What have you, what are some of the transformations that you've witnessed?
That's a great question, and I love it, because now I've done this enough that I can see during the process where those moments of, oh shit, never mind, get me out of this, let me quit. But when they don't, because they don't, we support them through that, saying you're right on schedule, this freak out is right on schedule. Then it's not like a blanket permission to go be awesome. We're still human, we're still filled with doubt, we're still, what if it doesn't work? And I say this often, when I published my first book, I was really disappointed. I was like, I was pretty sure Oprah was supposed to call today. She didn't, and what the hell? But so there's a moment of reality, but somebody asked me just even the other day of, how many authors go on to write another book? I said, well, not everybody, but it's probably 20 times more likely for somebody who's written one book to write another book than it is for people who have never written a book, right? Because we know we can. And it's that, whether the book is the thing or starting a foundation. So Stacey Dyson is a poet. She published 2 collections with us last year, and that reinvigorated her for the vision that she had for an international community of poets, an international network of women to support one another artistically, poetically, but also when somebody is in an unsafe situation, there's this international community that's been built. Like, hey, I'm in this town, I need this help. Who do you know? Even if you're not in this town, who do you know? Okay. And she's built a community that answers a need that wasn't there before, that she didn't have whether it was the confidence or the energy or the connectivity of, oh, you're reading my book. It created something that wasn't there before. And that network is now a treasure that has its own ripple effects. It's changing lives. And I'm not going to claim responsibility for her work, but we created this container where she found her strength again, that she found her voice again. And as a poet, what else is there? It was on not even quite the back end of the pandemic. She's a spoken word artist, lifeblood on the stage, had not been in front of another person for almost 2 years. Okay. She said to me, publishing my book saved my life. Whether that's literally or energetically, or gave back her voice to her so that she can help others find their voice, amplify their voice, use their voice. Another woman put out a book recently about teacher burnout that cranked up her visibility in her space. She's supporting now countless teachers who then support students. And so where does that positive impact end? It just goes. It's like pay it forward, but on cocaine. It's just so limitless. A book itself, I'm sort of old school. A book, I'm very old school, is your heart and your soul and your mind on the page. This book will outlive us. It will reach countless more people than we ever could in our lives. And it will go on forever. And I love that.
So what was the first book? Because what comes to mind now is like, what was the first book that you had the courage to write? And what was your processing through that process? Like, why that book?
I wrote the book that I needed the most. And I think a lot of us do. We write the book that we need. The first book that I wrote was the second book I published, because I wrote it and I treasured the manuscript too much to sort of experiment on putting Date Yourself out into the world. And this was my recipe to find myself, because I didn't think I was lovable. And this is what I was teaching other women to do and couldn't do for myself. Okay. I still need to go back and read this from time to time, because just because you write the book does not mean you become the mistress of all things inside. It's not a straight line. But the process of writing this book, I attribute to Lisa Lister, who is an incredible woman out of the UK. Her books, and then some of her courses, I've worked with her, brought me back to my cyclical nature, brought me back to the seasons, brought me back to this concept of rest. We talk about this a lot at Red Thread, of the dreaming phase, the resting, planning. Those are our words, but the phases of the moon and the menstrual cycle. And she actually has written a best-selling book called Witch, which is amazing. And through the process of slowing down and really connecting with myself, I was able to pour out this manuscript in a 28-day cycle, but the writing of the book happened in 4 days. It just, because it was all the stuff that I knew I needed and didn't quite believe. And I was writing to someone else, and it came right through me. Yeah. And so I gifted myself that process. And I saw how much I grew in the writing of that book and changed. And a friend of mine refers her clients to this book on the regular, and we were just talking about it briefly the other day. I said, "Oh, that sounds like a really good book. I should probably read that," because there are times where I get lost and I need to be reminded. And so even for the woman who wrote the book, there's times where like, I need that right now.
I always say that if you want the kind of relationship that you're putting out there that you want with others, you have to love yourself and learn how to have the best love affair with yourself first before you can do it with others.
Yep. And
that's some of the unpacking that we have to do, right?
And this is really predominant in most cultures now, but that we're looking outside of ourselves. We're looking, can I buy it? Can I earn it? Can I win it? Will you love me? Because if I can make you love me, then I'm lovable. And that's sort of bullshit. And that's going to backfire. And that's not real. Because when that ends or changes, then we're back to square one. And we're always coming from a place of doubt. And I'm not sure. And it's not from the only place that we have any influence over is ourselves. And I think we spend most of our lives just trying to make the world do what we want it to do. And that is futile, and it's never going to work out. Even if we're temporarily successful at one part of it, it's not lasting, and it's not where the real work could happen. And so the real work, the lasting work, the only influence I actually have is over myself.
So that kind of brings me to,
yeah,
for a woman who had a lot of self-doubt, who didn't know how to have her voice, who all these things, how did you go from that to say, you know what, F this shit, I'm going to start a publishing company, and not only am I going to start a publishing company, I'm going to help 10,000 women publish the books this year, or I'm going to publish 10,000 books this year.
So the mission is to support 10,000 women to become successful published authors and thought leaders. That's okay. And that's a little bit different I don't want to publish 10,000 books in a year. That the infrastructure and the energetics of that is a whole nother thing. And so I'm accomplishing my mission if one person listens to this and gets one step closer and says, you know what? All right, I'm gonna use my voice a little bit. That's accomplishing the mission.
But how did you get to become like,
Yeah.
what made you say, you know what, I'm going to start a book publishing company? Like, you know, I mean, you came from this, you talk about how you didn't have a voice, you had some of these things that you've had to overcome in your life. And you say, you know what, I'm still going to start a publishing company.
I'm going to do this impossible thing. And I think it was on the back end of having published 2 books myself, having done 2 impossible things, and realizing that it was easier than I thought, so much more doable than I had imagined it to be. Hard as fuck, but still possible. And almost easy, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know a word in English that means hard as fuck and still easy, but it was that. And when I navigated this space on my own, writing 2 books, publishing 2 books, I looked at a lot of other publishing options and companies and was offered publishing deals, but none of them felt right. And so I chose to do it myself. And I realized the work that I had been doing supporting women's empowerment was missing this one piece. I loved my work, but there was something really tangible missing. And I saw how the work that I'd been doing, writing and publishing my own books, was like that missing piece of, here's the container, here's the process where women can dive into their story more, walk through this transformational journey, have something to hold at the end, and have this identity shift. It's not just an energetic thing. I'm an effing author. Who I am changed. And it was happening before energetically. But again, in a society where we're looking outside for validation, when we're looking outside for who we are and what we're about, we need that tangible piece. We need that physical to hold. I have a pile of books that I'm responsible for. Like, I can hold it, I can hand it to somebody, I can open it up and read it and be like, oh, that's really good. Who wrote that? Oh, it was me. That shift from I mean, I'm all for the subtle, I'm all for the energetics. But I think I had gone so far into the feminine space that I was neglecting the fact that we still live in a masculine and a tangible world. And when I saw what was happening for me with getting my books written and published, I said, I want to offer this to others. I see women trying in this space and failing in this space because there's not that energetic container. All the advice is just go do it. Follow these 10 steps, go away for a month, write your book this weekend. I was like, yeah, but I'm a single mom. Who's raising my kid? How am I supposed to write my book this weekend and raise my 6-year-old? She was 4, 5, and 6, and now 7. Who the advice wasn't for me. And so I figured out how to do it. I wrote a manuscript with I guess she was 3.5, 4 at the time, in the middle of the night. She was asleep next to me and I poured this book out. So if I figured out how, and I used all of my teacher things, I was like, I can teach other people how to do this. I can teach them the logistics of how to do this as a woman, but I can also show them the energetic container and walk through fire, walk through that gauntlet, walk through the heroine's journey into that dark space and walk back out.
So what separates Red Thread Publishing from other publishing companies?
So on some level, a lot of things. And on other levels, there's sort of nothing. We help people to get books out, right? But what does separate us, we support the writing process, which I've never seen a publisher have anything to do with. And that's all that we've been talking about. You can't publish if you can't get it onto the paper. You don't come up to a publisher and say, like, I have a great idea in my head. You still have to write an 80-page proposal that's really all business and bullshit. It's great, valuable market research, whatever. But if you cannot get this story out of your heart and your head and out of your body onto the damn page, you can't publish that. Right? You know this.
Mm-hmm.
The
So how,
story was
so
baby
you're
for
saying
so
like,
long.
so
We
you
support
help
the writing process.
So what does that look like for somebody that may not know, may never even heard like Red Thread?
Fair enough. So we have 3 parts: the writing, the publishing, and the impact. Because what I started Red Thread because I saw a need and I saw the potential that was so close and missing. Nobody was supporting the writing process, where a lot of the emotional healing and trauma actually gets excavated. The publishing process and the impact is where you actually make money and connect with readers and do the whole point. You didn't write a book just for the shits and giggles. You wrote a book because you want to change the world. And so many people are writing books and missing that piece of making that impact, connecting with people and having their books mean something. So we've created a community, and this is the other thing that's missing from a lot of publishing is community. You don't have to do this by yourself. Writing is something you do alone, but you don't have to do it on your own. No one else can write your story for you, but that does not mean you have to become a lonely alcoholic and trap yourself in the woods somewhere to get your story out. That as women, another missing piece of our healing is to come back together. We are not competitors. We are not adversaries. We are stronger together, and we've created this safe space where we can learn this process of coming back to ourselves, resting, listening, facing that all of the really sort of scheduled fears. We're like, at this phase, this is what you're going to be freaking out. And at this phase, this is what you're going to be freaking out about. And when we see other women going through that process and hearing that it's right on schedule, that you're doing exactly what you need to do, and that if you're freaking out, it does not mean you're failing or doing it wrong. It means you are doing the process. We talk about books like babies, that you're pregnant with this story, with this idea, this thing to share. And then you go through this labor process, which is painful and terrifying. And in the actual birth process, every woman, there's a moment just before birth where you're like, nope, never mind. I give up. Done. I'm not doing this. Which of course is ridiculous because there's absolutely nothing you can do to get out of it once you're that far in. And that's the sign that the baby's coming, right? Well, we do the same thing with our book birth, that we freak out and we say, I cannot do this. We say, congratulations, it's coming. Now's it's happening. If you've ever given birth or attended
Take deep breaths, take deep breaths.
right? Inhale, relax, let it, there's nothing that you can do at that point. And it's that stage of birth. And then the book is in the world. But you have to keep feeding the baby after it's born. You have to continue to nurture your story, get it into the hands of the people who need it. And when we're in community, we're surrounded by women who are constantly at one of these phases of their book process. And so we're not going into this unknown because we've watched you and we've watched the women before you and we've watched the women before that. And so when we're in our own process, we can relax a little bit. It's still terrifying and it still hurts, but there's something really comforting about knowing the phases, knowing there's a woman who's publishing in January and she said, oh, I'm freaking out now. Oh, I'm relaxed now. I'm freaking out now. Oh, I'm relaxed now, right? but
Yep.
but now she's recognizing her own process, and her freakouts are subdued. And even her, like, I'm relaxed, but I know I'm going to be freaking out in 2 weeks. There's
Yep.
something unbelievably comforting in that, where when we don't know this bigger picture and we haven't witnessed other women go through it, when we're freaking out, we think we've done it wrong. When we're in pain, we think, I'm going to die. When we're afraid, we think, I'm going to die. But when we've seen others go through this process, when we have a container, when we have a map laid out, this is when you do this, and this is how it's going to feel. And okay, somebody signs a contract with us and I say, and they're like, I'm freaking out. Yes, we have a new word for it. You're excitified. They're like, I'm
Love
excited
that.
and terrified. No, you're excitified.
Certified.
It is this dual, holy shit, oh my God, what's happening? I'm trying something new. I'm freaking out. I love it. And I'm terrified, right? You're excitified. And I say, yep, you're probably going to have at least 12 more of those, holy shit, oh my God, yes, crazy, like all sideways experiences between now and when your book comes out. And I'm preparing them for this roller coaster of transformation through both the guidance, like I've lived it, you're watching, you know, somebody who's publishing this month, somebody who's publishing next month, somebody, it's like taking us back to the red tent, where we've shared our stories, where we've witnessed life, where we've witnessed birth, where we've witnessed death and rebirth, that we're like, oh yeah, I know this is you're supposed to be screaming. That's exactly what's supposed to be happening right now. So I can relax into the process. And it, in the birth process, if you can relax, if you can soften the muscles, the pain is less. If you can relax, the birth is easier. If you're panicking, you might stop. You might, and that's what happens for so many women who are doing this on their own.
That's why it took me 10 years.
It takes us so long, is because we're like, I'm freaking out. I'm going to stop.
Yeah.
So we're creating a space where we're surrounded by others, and so that we can safely, not quickly, but accelerate this process so that we can arrive at just the next, it's not the end, it's just the next. Your book is in the world, and now you're working on it.
So what would be, for somebody who might be either has a book or maybe never even thought about writing as like a therapeutic tool, right? What would be 3 things you would say to folks that they could do today, that they can start the process now, whether it's just writing for therapeutic or publishing a book?
Okay, great. So they're a little bit different, because I don't want to prescribe the wrong thing for the wrong person. If you have a book in you, you feel like you have a book in you, you know you have a book in you, you really want to have a book in you, I want you to set a publishing date. That feels really big, feels really scary. Laura, when I met you last October, you had this manuscript, you'd had it for years, it had been edited already. I said, let's set your publishing date right now. Okay. And it was,
And it's been changed 3 times.
And yeah, well, of course, but that's okay.
But we still did it.
But we still did it. A year later, there's a book on your shelf.
2.
Okay. 2 books on your shelf, right? So again, using that birth metaphor, if you think you're pregnant, you go to the doctor, and you know what they do? They tell you exactly when your baby's due. And then you plan your whole life around that date. And so if you are holding a story in you, you're pregnant. And I want you to begin to make it real by choosing a date. Okay. We always recommend 365 days from today or less, right? Like 8 to 12 months, because that makes it super real. if you say, I'm going to publish a book March 7th, 2025, I'm not going to do anything about it for a real long time.
Yeah.
Right? Just a second. So you have to make it real. That's creating the container. It's a time-based energetic container of, oh shit, I'm really doing this. But to the other person who's not quite there yet and wants to use writing as a healing tool, I found the most valuable exercise I got from The Artist's Way, Julia Cameron, morning pages. It is a day after day stream of consciousness, whatever the clutter in your head, pen to paper. She says 30 minutes. That's a bit much. It's real hard to do 30 minutes. And if my saying do 30 minutes means you don't do 5 minutes, just stream of consciousness, pen to paper for as long as you can handle. Okay. Because what I found was there was so much shit in my head. It's like being a hoarder without even realizing it. My brain was holding all of these thoughts, all of these ideas that I didn't even see. I didn't even know my own mind. And by putting pen to paper, whether I was writing my grocery list or, you know, as I say to others, just Sierra's a bitch. She told me to write these pages and I can't believe it. This is stupid, blah, blah, blah. Whatever's on your mind, I don't care. Blame me.
Mind dump.
Right? It is a brain dump. And it doesn't feel like much is happening, but I want you to think about it like a daily bowel movement. If you don't poop every day, you're going to start to feel gross real soon. And before that, I didn't have a way to get my thoughts out of my head. And so they were just the same 80,000 thoughts that you have every day, but it was just regurgitating the same stuff. And there was no digestive process and there was no filter of, I don't want to carry that thought around with me anymore. I could leave it on the page and I could rip the page up, I could burn the page. And then I began to see my own environment, right? But going back to our earlier thing, I left the culture of the US by physically leaving the country. When I could do my morning pages, I could see the culture of my own brain and be really intentional and selective about it over time of like, oh, I don't want to live in that space anymore. I'm going to leave that thought on the page and it's usually the first 2 pages that are total crap, pun intended. And then maybe there's a nugget near the end, something valuable that you discover that you can hinge on and work with. And if not, if you're just clearing the decks, it's super beneficial. So either set the date or put pen to paper and just clear the mind.
Right. The second tip?
Well, so publish date. And
Okay, so
so publish date. And the third, find a community. Find another person that you like or know or trust or a total stranger who is in a similar journey as you so that you do not feel like you're doing this alone. Find another person who is working through her own journey. Don't take on all her shit. Don't become responsible for her book so that you can avoid yours. But find a space where you can become accountable, where you can say out loud, I'm writing a book, or I'm healing this, or I'm processing this. Because again, whether you write it down or you say it out loud, you have given credibility to this idea, to this thought. It becomes real when another person knows about it. And we do that in our group of like, my name is, I'm writing this book about, and it comes out on this day. I have everybody say that every week on our publishing calls. This is who I am. This is what I'm writing about. And this is when my book is coming out. It makes it real every step of the way.
It's an advertising campaign to the brain too. It's a reminder.
This is what I'm doing. This is who I am. And this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm about. Okay. Because I love neuroscience, but we have the negativity bias. For every positive thought, there are 10 negative thoughts. So we need to tip that scale. And this is who I am. This is what I'm about. This is when my book is coming out. Just to create a little bit of that positive, just to keep us moving towards that goal.
Well, this has been absolutely amazing. How would folks be able to find you if they wanted to learn more about you or
Absolutely.
Red Thread Publishing?
Yep. Well, our website is redthreadbooks.com. We have an open writers community if anybody's looking for that community, resources, etc. On Facebook, Red Thread Writers. You're most welcome in there because we definitely don't have to do this alone. Instagram, Red Thread Books. We are really about connecting. So whether you are, this is the first time you've ever thought of writing, or you have a manuscript or 6 sitting in a drawer somewhere, take the next step, whatever that next step is for you. But you do not have to figure it out yourself. You do not have to do it alone. We are really, really, there's an incredible community of women and it's growing every day. So reach out. We're really happy to support.
Well, thank you so much, Sierra. And don't forget, for those who are listening, don't forget to follow, don't forget to like, don't forget to share, don't forget to leave feedback and let us know what are some of the things that you learned or had gotten from today's podcast episode. Until next time, thank you again.